G'day guys, in this video I'm going to be mounting an ARB twin compressor. I have the portable version, but it's easy to change to the hard mount version. So in this video we'll cover the costs and weights of the compressor itself, as well as everything we use to do the job of hard mounting it. I'm going to go through why I decided to hard mount it versus the benefits of keeping it as a portable compressor, and I'm just going to discuss a few of the key points as to why I located it inside the canopy and why I'm actually wiring it off the secondary battery, which is a lithium, instead of running a cable to the starter battery, which I normally would recommend and I think is kind of the smarter decision. But you have to take each install on its merits, which is what we'll be going through today. I've got the ARB twin compressor portable version, and the reason I went for that is because I wanted the flexibility between keeping it portable and being able to hard mount it. And the portable one comes with the little air gun, comes with a nice case that if I decide to hard mount it, which I am, I can actually use that case for something else. It's got the air tank and everything. The mounting itself is not a hard thing to do, so I'd rather have all these other benefits of having the portable compressor and one day being able to change it back to the portable compressor. Say if I sell the car or something like that, I can just put it back in its case and I have the portable compressor again. The reason I went for the twin over the single is speed, basically. Yes, it costs more money, but one of the biggest deterrents to people in general is the lack of time. So you want to deflate quickly and you want to inflate quickly. The twin compressor is the fastest option, and the reputation that these things have is really good. So there's plenty of good brands out there. You don't have to go ARB. Good brands that offer both single and twin compressors at lots of different price points. So the twin offers me a speedier inflation process. It also gives 100% duty cycle, meaning I don't need to let the compressor rest. So with portable versus hard mount compressors, there are advantages to both. With the portable, obviously you're not lugging around that weight all the time, and also you can easily take it out of your car, put it into someone else's car if they don't have a compressor or something, or you're using a different car, for example. The downside to portable compressors is that every time you want to air up, you're popping the bonnet and making connections and running everything out that way. It takes a bit more time. So with the hard mount compressor, all the wiring is done, and what this means is that there's a lot of time saved. All you do, in my case, will be open the canopy door, flick a switch, and everything's ready to go. I can have the hose ready to go in a bag right next to the compressor. All I've got to do is flick the switch. The hard mount compressor is not going to get stolen like a portable compressor could if you accidentally left it unattended. The downside obviously is that you can't actually take it into another vehicle. You can have people pull up next to you and fill up their tyres that way, but you can't actually go on a trip in another car with your compressor. You'd have to have another portable or hard mounted compressor. The weight of it as well, you're always lugging that weight around. You can't just take it out during the week and put it in on the weekend. And the other thing is the space that it takes up. It's always going to be there. You can't remove it from the car with ease and put it off to the side. So the ARB twin compressor has a maximum draw of 69 amps. That is two separate motors for the two compressors. Each one draws roughly 35 amps or just under. Now when you're wiring a hard mounted compressor straight to a lithium battery, there's a few limitations that you might encounter. The first one obviously is your battery discharge rate. If your battery can't discharge the required current, then there's no point even looking at this and you'll have to go to your starter. In my case, I've got the Enerdrive BTEC 125 amp hour G2, has a maximum discharge rate of 100 amp hours for about 30 minutes at 25 degrees Celsius. So although it's unlikely that the temperature will be 25 degrees Celsius or below, the good news is that we won't be getting anywhere near 100 amp hours. We'll have about a 31 amp hour headroom at maximum draw, and we also won't be required to use it for 30 minutes. But even so, if you go off your secondary battery, I recommend leaving the car running anyway, just to give that secondary battery as much juice as it possibly can draw from the starter battery, which will be limited by whatever your charging situation is and the amps of the alternator at idle. So the other thing to consider with this discharge rate is that is the discharge of the battery in its entirety. So if you have other things running off the battery, you have to take all that into account. In my case, worst case scenario is that the compressor is running and the fridge is running at the same time with 3 or 4 lights around the canopy. Unlikely, but that's probably the worst case scenario. So that is about 77.5, 78 amps of power draw. So we've still got 22 amps of headroom there, and that scenario is unlikely to play out because most of the time you'll be filling up, you won't have lights on, and your fridge won't by coincidence be drawing that maximum power. The other thing to take into account is that this 69 amps is the the absolute peak that the compressor will draw. It's more likely to be drawing somewhere between 50 and 60 amps as it's filling up, and under no load it's a lot less than that. So the 69 amps is not a continuous draw of the compressor. The next limiting factor would be your cable size selection. Now I factored this in a long time ago. I went oversized cable from the output of the lithium battery. It's 2-gauge cable. This can handle up to 180 odd amps or so there's no issues there. Even if my inverter, which is 600 watts, was somehow pulling all 600 watts, that's 50 amps. At the 69 or 70 amps of the compressor, if for some reason it was also pulling maximum load, and that's 120 amps, add the fridge in, 124.5, add some lights, 128.5, and we're still well under what this 2-gauge cable can handle. So the next limiting factor is your fuse size. I have a 125 amp hour fuse, A&L, mounted on the battery. Obviously I could up this to 150 amps and still be safe on that 2-gauge cable, but it is unlikely that that 125 amps will ever be reached. There's so many limiting factors here. Likelihood that you'll have everything on at once, as well as the fact that the inverter would be running anywhere near 50 amp, because you only have X amount of things that you can plug into it, unless you had a power board running power tools while you were filling up your tyres, while you had all your lights on, while the fridge for some reason was maxed out at its maximum compressor amp rating. So it's just not going to happen. And that is basically how I came to think that I would mount on the lithium battery. In saying that, I would be wary about how long I used it for, because this is taking away the amp storage of your secondary battery. So if you do fill up, you want the car on, and ideally you'll be going for a decent enough drive afterwards to compensate for the power that you sucked out from filling up the tyres. Now ordinarily you would wire your compressor to the starter battery, and that still remains the smartest thing to do. One of the main benefits of going from the starter battery is that starter batteries are designed for a high output, so running a compressor is not going to stress the battery at all, and also it ensures that the car is on when you're doing it. And just because your lithium battery can handle the compressor, that doesn't mean that it is the best spot to wire the compressor back to. So my decision to wire it off the lithium, there's a few more reasons than just the fact that it can handle it, and I'll show you them now. So initially I was reluctant to run it off the lithium, and when I was going to go off the starter battery, my first choice mounting location was here. This is a behind the wheel toolbox. Compressor does fit, but it's very tight. This is where we run into a few problems. The first one being lack of airflow in this sort of setup. There's not a whole lot of air around it. These get very hot and they vibrate a lot, and it's not the best environment for it to be in, to be honest. That brings us into the second issue. When I started looking at the actual numbers, the run with the return is about 11 meters. So where this is an issue is that to provide less than 3% volt drop across 11 meters, there's two ways you can do it. You can run cable for each compressor, or you can run one larger cable and then do a drop down joint where you split it into two smaller cables for the connection here. But you have to split it at the other end as well, so each motor is individually fused. Smaller cable here wouldn't be able to take an 80 amp load, so it needs to be fused at 40 amp. So either way, what we're looking at is 11 meters of cable. So for a single cable that you drop down, for less than 3% volt drop, we got 11 times 69 times 0.0185, and then we run through the rest of the calculations with 2-gauge cable to get less than 3% volt drop. Any smaller cable and your volt drop increases. Now when we drop that to two separate runs, we are still looking at 4-gauge cable. 4-gauge I think is 21.1 mil squared. So we've got 11 meters, but we drop it to the single motor load, so we do 35 amps, and you can see that 4-gauge works out below 3% here. So what you're looking at there is more than $200 worth of cable, and that's just the cable. That doesn't include any lugs, cable glands, sealed conduit, because I'd rather run non-split with dual heat shrink for anything under the car. And all of a sudden your costs start adding up. You're looking at an extra $200 to $350 worth of materials, and the labour of this is hours worth. It's a couple good hours worth of work. So when you add that to the weight that you're adding in cable, because you need quite a large cable running the length of the car, and the fact that although this is a great use of the available space, because it's almost a perfect size, you really got a lack of airflow. It's not the best environment for the compressor to be in. That ruled out the option of the starter battery to the toolbox. For now, that is a no-go. Now the reason that this 3% volt drop is an ideal target to go for is because the less hard that your compressor has to work, the longer lifespan you'll get out of it. And a large appeal of going with the twin compressor is that it's doing the same work but with less effort. Because of the twin compressor and the twin motor, it can do it a lot easier and put itself under less stress. So there's no point running small cables and stressing the compressor motors. That's just counterintuitive. The whole idea here is to have that running as efficiently as possible, having basically no voltage drop and getting a long life out of the compressor that you spend $1,000 on. So next I was thinking about mounting it inside the canopy somewhere and running the cables out of the canopy. If this was too far, we wanted to get as short a length as possible, which would mean figuring out a mounting point around here somewhere. But this exit point from the canopy, it is chockers. So when we're talking about 4-gauge cables, with this being a shorter run, you could arguably do a 6-gauge cable. It still requires a decent sized gland. It's pretty difficult to get in there. We don't really want to be accessing this gland plate and removing the headboard, and we've got the fridge and the table combo here as well. So that headboard is getting less and less likely that it's going to be accessed anytime soon, unless I have a really big job on that needs to remove it. So that to me wasn't a feasible option because the actual cable run is not that much shorter, so we're still looking at really big cables. The engine bay for me is not an option. I've taken up so much room in there. There is nowhere left to mount anything. Because I have an extra cab, I could fit something out on the rear here, and this might be something I do in the future if I find that it's not working very well off the Lithium, but I think I will avoid this because I think the Lithium will be able to handle it just fine. It's a lot of noise and vibration to be adding to the cab for any passengers that you might have. Now I've finally settled on Lithium to canopy. Mounting in the canopy, it has a lot of benefits. I'm not drilling any holes in the canopy, so there's no waterproofing required. If it doesn't work out, I simply unbolt it and move it somewhere else. There's nothing to patch up at all. It's like it never existed. The cable run can be even shorter than the supplied loom. It's going to be a really short cable run. I don't have to drill any holes in the canopy. I don't have to waterproof anything. I don't have to run any cables. I don't have to buy any extra cables or lugs or heat shrink. The way it is centralised, it's basically right in the middle of the canopy. By silly mounting it, we're taking up space that was otherwise useless and was going to go unused. It doesn't take up the footprint on the floor and it's not blocking anything inside the canopy. So here we have the ARB twin compressor. The portable version comes in this carry case. This is sealed and weatherproof, so it is a good carry case to keep. It's quite sturdy, and you see you got your nice rubber seal around the outer edge of the lid there. In here you got twin compressor, 4-litre air tank. This is another reason I went for the twin, is because this can run air tools and things like this. This actually comes with the portable version. It's just handy to have with the air tank there. In there you just got your hose. I believe that's a 6-metre one. These are two 40-amp fuses because the compressor is made up of 2 separate motors, so each one on 40 amps. Because this is portable, obviously it has your alligator clamps for battery connection. Compressor comes with this switch and this little port. I'm going to reuse by relocating this elsewhere because where I want to mount the compressor will not be accessible. I'm just going to move the whole manifold, have this right near the canopy door. I've already unbolted this, but in case you're wondering, you have 8 Allen key heads here. Portable compressor is bolted to the bottom of the case. I've unbolted it already because I've had to play around with different mounting locations. I also plan on moving this and mounting it somewhere in the car because this is a handy little pouch to have. All you need to do is bend these and then you can try and mount this somewhere else in the car or leave this in a drawer somewhere. Now the compressor is heavy. There is a fair bit of weight to this. So you got the compressed air into the tank, out of the tank. This was connected to this outlet. I am going to be removing this hose and extending it with a longer hose to reach the new mounting location of this. The compressor from ARB 14.261, that is exactly as it's shipped. This is an extension hose, 1.5 meters, and now we're just going through some nuts and bolts, extra purchases that I had to make along the way for nuts and bolts, mudguard washers because I changed them all out. This is lugs and crimps and heat shrink and ring terminals, a couple bushings for holes through the headboard, and these are some brick tyres that I plan on using, sticky backs. This rubber insertion is just for dampening vibrations, so I'll put that between metal to metal surfaces. All my corrugated tubing, split tubing, and a couple additions I had to buy along the way. This is all of my cable. So 2.9 for the cable and 1.2 for the 20mm aluminium strut that I'll be cutting up. the roof is my first idea of where I can mount it. There's no way I'd mount it to the headboard because of the vibrations that it lets off. I would risk damaging the display, the red arc BMS30, the inverter. All those electronics would be ruined in no time. So that is not even an option. I considered mounting to the back of the fridge cage, but I don't think it's a sturdy enough connection to hold this compressor, again, with the amount of vibrations that it gives off. Now, I didn't want to take up any floor space with the compressor because this is my storage space. So I started looking at the roof, inverting it, hanging it upside down, and I can't see any issues with that. The vibrations won't transmit themselves so much to the headboard, and it doesn't take up any floor space. 20mm struts with the compressor and the tank mounted, and then that strut will get mounted into these east-west struts. In regards to positioning, front of the car, keep the weight forward, and as central as possible. I'm thinking of getting an overhead shelf here that sort of runs north-south on this right-hand side. I want to leave at least 500 there and mount the compressor this way. So on top of the fridge might look like a good option, but if you flip this fridge cage lid, you have a storage solution with protective edges around it to stop things falling off. So one day if I wanted to turn this top of the fridge cage into a storage solution, I would flip that lid and use it, but the compressor would block that from being useful. So my current plan is to keep it as close to the Blue Sea Safety Hub 150 as possible. I want the cable runs to be as short as possible, and that will also allow this 1.5 meter extension hose to reach the right hand side where I want to mount the outlet and the switch that I took off the compressor. So I think this is the most likely sort of mounting arrangement here, just so that 1.5 meter hose from the tank is definitely long enough. One limitation I'd like to point out with the mounting is that these are not the same distance apart as these. This is a larger gap. What that means is I won't be able to run 2 bars from there and there. I can run 3 bars, lining the tank up with 1 and then having a separate one mounted for that. This gap here is 110 millimeters, but the gap on the compressor between the 2 mounting points is 136 millimeters. That and that being a 16mm difference with a strut that is about 20 something mil wide, that bar won't fit side by side with that bar. So we're using the outer mounts for the compressor just to try and get the 3rd bar having enough clearance from extrusion to extrusion to mount onto the roof. Catfish. I was basically going to flip the switch around obviously, using these 2 long tabs, nut and bolt to the headboard with enough room on the back for the cable and the braided hose, and enough room on the front for that hose connection. Now the reason I wanted to mount it here is because this is the driver's side of the canopy, so every time I get out of the driver's side I just open this door, flick a switch here and plug the hose in, everything's good to go. Don't have to walk around to the far side of the canopy. Keeping it mounted to the outside here, it should reach all 4 tyres. This 1.5 meter extension will run up and to the compressor. What I'll do is actually install this first and then I will attach this to the back and run it out. Depending on the length of this, I might need the tank to be oriented to the right hand side of the car, or if I've got excess length to play with, I can orient it however I want. On top of that, we'll be extending the switch cables from the compressor down to here. I have a dash feed at these switches here. I just need to extend it out to attach to this switch. This port has existing tape on it, so I haven't reapplied any, but if it gets too worn out, I'll just put some thread sealant on there. Now the next issue we have is this depth here from the upright and the fact that it's putting pressure on the joint. So what I'm going to do is put this in the vise and bend these tabs just there where it becomes its thinnest. So I've bent this bracket in the vise and I've drilled 2 holes, M6 bolts. Not a lot of weight in this, doesn't need to be overkill. The reason I bent the bracket is because I have a straight fitting here and I'm angling it towards the wall to get past these uprights. I've added the 1.5 meter extension hose there. The remains of the thread sealant that were on there look to be good enough. Now when we turn the compressor on, we'll just see if there's any leaks. That is tight. This corrugated tubing is basically to stop the stainless steel from having any reactions with all the aluminium, but also to protect the cables on the back, just in case the stainless steel braid started to fray and had any sharp edges. So that's it for the pneumatic side. All I need to do is disconnect this part and connect that up. The other portion of this bracket is the switch and the electrical side. So just to touch on the switch, you'll see that we have 5 pins here, a side with 2 pins. Now this is our dash light feed, and what that is you will have a small illumination that you can wire to a dash light, so when your car interior lights come on, all your switch locator LEDs come on. I will be wiring this up to a dash light LED feed that I've wired into the left hand side switch panel on the canopy. By removing the right hand side switch panel, I have access to that dash light feed. On the other side here, what we have in the middle pin is a common that will switch. So the common is number 2, that will switch to number 3 on and off. Number 1 is the negative for that LED, not for the load. It is just so a light will illuminate when this switch is in the on position. A bit of wiring that we have with the portable is this here, which is connected here. Now this is for our switch. This is a waterproof plug. There are a few options here. You can cut this here and extend these 3 cables to your switch. You can keep the plug but re-terminate it by running wires straight from the plug to where you want them to go. You can keep the plug, leave these in, cut them, make a join, or you can keep the plug and add male spade connectors into these female spade connectors. So there's plenty of ways you can go about redoing your switching. Now again, what you'll notice is you've got a black, a purple, a red, but in this loom there is an inline joint. They split the red core into 2 and they split the negative into 2. I'll overlay an image now of what this switch originally looked like. You see that the red is on the common and the dash light positive. So the red is just a constant feed. The purple comes off the switched pin. So the purple is outgoing to the relay coil, and that is what will turn on your compressor. The blacks are split. Again, these are just negatives. You have your dash negative for the dash LED, and the other negative is for the LED that comes on when the switch is in the on position. So what I'll be doing is leaving everything intact and joining connectors into here, then extending that with cable out to here. The cable can be very small because all it is doing is powering a relay coil, and relay coils normally draw less than 0.2 of an amp. They have a very low power draw. It is not switching the compressor itself. Now in my particular instance, I don't need all of these cores. I'll be picking up a dash light feed and a dash light negative from my right hand side switch panel. So that eliminates the need for 2 of these cores. The purple goes to the coil of the compressor. So definitely need to have 1 cable from the output side of the switch that goes up to the compressor. So I'll definitely be extending 1 cable into the purple. The negative for this switch LED, I can pick that up off the right hand side switch panel as well. And the other feed that actually goes to the common, I can also just loop the dash light feed onto here. Because the relay coil will have such a small power draw, I can use my dash light feed, which is a fused circuit, and loop that onto common and the dash light feed. And then I'll only have 1 core that I need to extend from the compressor to the switch. So what I would have is a dash light feed off the right hand switch panel, looping at the common, going to the dash light feed. I'd have my dash light negative, which will connect to the dash light negative pin. I would have another negative from the back of the switch panel. I'd have the common, which as we've discussed already would be looped with the dash light feed. And then I would have only 1 cable from the compressor to the switch. All of the other pins would be from the right hand side switch panel to this switch. So the advantage of using the dash light feed to loop to here is that then it would be fused, whereas as far as I can tell this is not fused anywhere, but ordinarily it is mounted in a carry case and it is quite a small cable run, so it wouldn't need to be fused. Now that it's a bit of a longer run and it's running behind a headboard, it could do with fusing, even though I am going to protect it. Now this is the right hand side switch panel. At the left hand side switch panel I've wired this feed here to turn on the dash lights. So you can see the dash lights come on there. The 2 switches on the left are single pole, single throw switches. So that is the style of switch that we are wiring to for the compressor. The other 2 switches are a 2-way switch that is switched a little bit differently. Now the thing with that dash light circuit that I ran, because I also wanted to switch the dash light on the 2 ways and they have a different connection point at the back, I've actually got a switched negative. So that active is not switched at all. It is only the negative that is switched. So because the dash negative is switched, I cannot loop that dash negative here for the LED negative. So what I've got here, I've put little white paint pens on. There's my dash feed, constant. There's my dash negative with the white dashes. Then this is my constant negative, uninterrupted to the negative buzz bar. So I've tapped into the back of this switch panel. The only core that I need to run up to the compressor is the one that actually goes to the relay coil. This dash light positive will be my dash light LED feed, but it will also loop to the common. This is fused on a 3 amp circuit. So now the coil for the compressor is fused, has its own circuit with the dash lights. I'll be running this is about 1.13 millimeters squared. We can carry around about 20 amps of current, which is more than enough for the 3 amp fuse. Here are the existing bolts, which I was going to reuse, but they come up a little bit too short. So this is the rough plan of how it'll get mounted. 9 bolts, M8, going up through here into these channel nuts that I've mounted in here. So we have 2 compressor mount with 3 sealing mount, 2 air tank mounts, 3 sealing mounts, and then this one has 3 sealing mounts, but it also attaches the air tank and the compressor on the one bracket. So 3 bars. We've got 4 M6 bolts holding the compressor. We've got 4 M6 bolts holding the 4 litre air tank. Then into the ceiling we have 9 M8 bolts. There is a little strip of rubber in between each bolt and the metal to metal mating surface, and there will be strips of rubber going in between this channel and the ceiling channel. My thinking is that hopefully in some really small way it just helps with the vibration and suppressing the vibration transmitting through to the headboard. The way I figure, even if it does nothing, it can't make it worse. So that's why I'm just putting these in, just in the hope that it does something for the vibration. It provides a barrier between the metal to metal surfaces, a little bit of extra compression. So that's basically how it's going to go. I'm going to lift everything up, and then once that's done I'll take them out one at a time, add Loctite, and then bolt them in again. What I've done here is connect all the clips because it'll be a pain to reach up afterwards. You see here I have taped up all of the other blade connections that I don't need because I only need the purple to the relay coil. I'm going to add some split tubing over here and over the power loom just as a little bit of extra protection before I lift it up. So I've put little bits of corrie just to try and protect these cables everywhere. For the switch we just got our male blade connector connecting to the purple wire. So all of that will get taped up and put into corrugated tubing as well. Just tie it to these sticky back tie points with the air hose as well along the top. So all I'm doing now is replacing the washers for the 4 M6 into the compressor and the 4 M6 into the tank. I'm going to add these mudguard washers, and the reason being obviously is because this is just a thin-ish sheet of aluminium. This will help spread the load of these M6 bolts across the actual width of the channel a little bit better. So putting these mudguard washers in and getting rid of the original flats that I put in, and I'll just re-Loctite everything and then we'll lift it up into position. So now we have all our M6 bolts in with mudguard washers to give it the best load distribution possible. Here is the switch cable. I've just plugged it in and then added some tubing onto it. So with the original loom, because this is the portable version, you have your alligator clip, then you have 2 fuses here. So you'll notice 2 actives there, but only the 1 negative. That is because ARB do an inline join in here. When you get to the other end, you have your 2 negatives and another negative. That is for the relay coil. That is not to do with the compressor motors at all. So I'll be reusing this plug. Instead of ordering one and waiting for it to arrive, I'll just reuse this plug, chopping it at the length that I want. And whether that is before or after the inline joint doesn't matter, because the 2 negatives just get joined to the buzz bar anyway. I will be removing these inline 40 amp fuses because where I chop this will be connected to my Bluesea Safety Hub 150, and that will have 2 40 amp MIDI fuses inside that replace the inline fuses. This is just a power connection now. So all I've done is chop that portable compressor lead with the alligator clamps. That's what this plug here is. I'll just loop that over the air tank, drop it behind the headboard, and I've drilled some new holes in the headboard. I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished anyway. So this cable is already protected in this wrap. I'm going to try and tie it up with the other cables. Just got a bit of corrie on it just in case it droops on top of the headboard there, but I'm happy with this black wrap behind the headboard. That's plenty of protection for me. I'll put a little bit more corrie on as it comes out. So where I chopped it is before they split the negative, so there's only 1 negative there. I don't know the exact size because it's not marked, but it is roughly maybe an 8mm squared. These reds are about 6mm squared or just under. So to the negative buzz bar, and these land separately with 40 amp MIDI fuses in the Bluesea Safety Hub 150. So I'll put this in and I'll show you what it looks like at the end. You can see where the negative came out there onto the buzz bar. The 2 feeds come through here onto the buzz bar. each one separately fused. Alright guys, so the compressor is done. We'll run through what it looks like in a second once I put everything back together. At the moment though, that carry case, I've just run a brick tie through there. So the rods that come with this carry case are not the type that want to bend easily. So I've replaced them with brick ties, and I had an existing hole here from when I had to move the headboard over. So basically I've just looped that through there. So this will basically just sit here. By using the brick ties, it's actually saved me from drilling through the fabric, which is what I was going to do. I was actually going to bolt this somewhere, but I'll just leave it hanging there and I can access both sides more easily because it's a loose, dead weight. So for this next step, I've got the 40 amp MIDI fuses out, so the compressor motor will not start up. What I'm going to do is flick the switch. I have put the fuse for the dash light feed back in, so there will be a feed for this switch, but I don't want the compressor to start up just yet. I'm going to see how much current this actually draws first. So just briefly before we look at the power draw, this switch I have reversed it, and ordinarily that would be the on position there and that would be the off position. So here is our light that comes on when it is on. Now I actually prefer the way ARB had done the switch where that is in the on position. The only reason I changed it is to match these existing switch panels which work the opposite, where the on position is like that and that is the off position. So if I go around and turn my dash light feed on, and you'll see this light here is now the dash light, although ordinarily that would have been the light that came on when the compressor was on, and that would have been the dash light. But because I've swapped it around, that's just the way it goes. So for this first test, I'm just going to check how much the dash lights actually put on the circuit. So I just want to compare what the red arc says to this. So you can see the dash light feed, it really doesn't do much. It's about 0.02, maybe 0.03 of an amp. The ammeter switches about 0.02 to 0.03 amps when the dash lights come on. So I'm just testing the dash lights separately, but now I'm going to actually switch the compressor switch. About 0.3 amps there. And you can see the red arc raises by half an amp, and so does the ammeter there. So it's not just the relay, it's actually switching a little fan. So the combined total of the relay coil and that fan is about half an amp hour, and that is represented on both the red arc display as well as that ammeter. So now we have the two 40 amp MIDI fuses in. Next time we do the switching, the compressor will start up. Alright, for this next test, it's going to get a little bit noisy, but what I'm doing is I've got a full battery here and I've dropped all the tyres. I've dropped all the tyres to 15 psi, front and back. Now what I'm going to do is fill it up with a full battery without the car on, so there's no juice going back into the battery, and I'm just going to see how much it takes to go from 15 psi all round to about 38 psi all round. These are on 265, 65, R17 tyres, all terrains. They're not very aggressive all terrains. So you'll be able to see the power draw on the first tyre, hopefully on the ammeter, as well as on the red vision display there. Alright guys, so there you have it, 6% of the battery gone. That is for 4 tyres, 265, 65, R17, from 15 psi to between 38 and 40 psi. That's incredibly quick. It was only about 45 seconds per tyre to change it that amount, so that's real quick. I can feel the heat radiating off the compressor, but there's plenty of airflow around there, so there's heaps of room for it to radiate that heat. It is unfortunate that it is right next to the fridge, but the fridge should be well enough insulated to cope with that pretty easily. So that is 6% of the battery gone. Normally I'd be doing that with the car running anyway, just so this is getting something incoming as well as outgoing at the same time. So you wouldn't want to do that too many times in quick succession without driving in between. 6% is a decent chunk to take out in about 2 minutes. It's not something you have to do all the time. It might only happen 2 or 3 times a day. Generally, after you've filled your tyres up, you're going for a little bit of a drive anyway. Pretty happy with those results. So on the screen will be the weights that we've added. 65 grams for the rubber strip. In the lugs and heat shrink, etc., 66 grams. For nuts and bolts, we've added 622 grams. For the split tubing, 87 grams. For the actual struts, we added 611 grams. Cable was only 50 grams, it was just that small one core. In here is just the instructions. The 2 old rods. And the unused portion of the cable, as well as all of the existing bolts which we didn't use. Okay, so that's the compressor mount, ceiling mount. We've gone from portable to hard mount, taking up some space on the ceiling. I was really surprised about how little vibrations came through to the headboard. When I put my hand on there, I could barely feel anything. I was really struggling to pick up any vibrations at all. So pretty pleased with that. We don't want to damage anything on here, especially the battery management system. If the vibrations ever became an issue, all I would do is add extra strips of rubber in between all the metal to metal mating surfaces just to give it a bit of dampening. I'd say the biggest downside for me is the fact that this 20mm strut is quite weak, so it does kind of collapse when you start doing the bolts up, but the spring washers are compressed and there are 9 bolts supporting the weight, so I think it won't be an issue. They've all got Loctite in them. There's no reason for them to come loose. If they do, I'll upgrade from medium strength Loctite to the red Loctite, which will basically lock it in there for good. The compressor does let off a lot of heat, so that's not great with the fridge being there and everything, but the fridge obviously is insulated, so shouldn't affect it too bad. The good thing about it being here is that you won't accidentally touch it up here. It's out of the way, it's not touching or resting on anything that you might be storing in the canopy. No kids can get up there and touch it, and there's plenty of airflow around there for the compressor to cool down and radiate that heat away. So overall, it was basically just the cost of the compressor plus a few nuts and bolts, which I'll chuck up, and then things that I already owned, like strips of rubber and brick tyres and just bits and pieces lying around the house. This 20mm extrusion I actually already owned because I'd previously used it as roof bars, but removed it because it was too weak and flexed too much. Because this is a shorter span and it is no further than about 240mm between the bolts, and I'm using mudguard washers both with the M6 mount and the M8 mount, it's not going to be an issue here. It is plenty strong enough for the job. So for about 13 kilos worth of weight, that is spread across 8 M6 bolts for the actual compressor and tank itself, and 9 M8 bolts for the actual bar to the ceiling struts. So the weight per bolt is extremely small. The biggest issue over a long period of time will be the vibration making the bolts come loose. The weight itself is not an issue at all. So overall, I'm really happy with the install. So to go through 4 tyres, 265, 65, 17s, pretty small tyres, but to go from 15 to about 38, 40 PSI, took 6% of the battery, and normally I'd be doing it with the car on, but I wanted to see the results without any input into the battery, how much it actually drained. So where it is now, it does have a little bit of slack still in the extended air hose and the cable. I deliberately left extra cable there behind the headboard for this exact reason, but I might have to move it slightly when I get my overhead shelf, depending on the depth of the shelf and all that sort of stuff. But the good thing about these struts is that I just loosen them and the whole thing will slide in the strut. So pretty happy with this, just making use of an existing bolt hole that I had here. I could actually leave this plugged in if I wanted to, and this canopy door would still close. I can't see any reason leaving it plugged in. It's not going to take me much time to plug it in. On the flip side, I've moved the air nozzle gun to the back pouch where the instructions were, and I've just installed the tyre gauge pressure reader. This is also a core removal tool in the pouch where the air nozzle was. In here is the chuck, the core removal, and anything else air related. So a nice handy storage spot, everything is centrally located. Alright, that's it for the ceiling mount compressor. Hopefully you can do something similar and get the compressor up out of the way and hard mounted. We'll jump to the end screens now, we'll check out the total build cost and weight. Thanks for watching. twin mount compressor. It's not a twin mount. Off the secondary battery. And that is still remain lithium battery theoretic. Yeah. So as it comes shipped from ARG, if one of the others, if I start, now for the electrical I have it, and because it's going of a 100 amp hour, 2 gauge handle can with so I'll overlay a which will loop inside switch pin. Go and try a different straight up into 10mm square. And they didn't want to be it. So that's incredible. Hey mate, well, so what I'm doing.